It really opened my eyes to not only do I not know enough, but like, why didn't I put this together? That this is my body.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. So good to see you.
So good to see you. Smiling and radiant. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm really excited. I was just thinking of you smiling and radiant, and you probably have more sunshine than we are having.
Yes, the sun is shining.
Yeah.
Georgie is relaxing behind me. The sun is shining.
All is well.
All is well. So, we're just going to dive in.
Let's do it.
People who are interested in this topic.
I know.
So I would love for you to first just give us the intro. Tell us, we connected because you just finished my teacher training program, but you are a long time, super experienced yoga person. So we want to hear about that a bit. And what brought you to the pelvic floor?
I am a longtime yogi. I started in my mid 20s in the 90s, dating myself. So I've been teaching about 25 years, and I started in a really physical, form-driven kind of yoga. I was a tuck and thrust, that was it, tuck and thrust in everything. And it really affected my posture, and it affected everything. It affected my breath. I started having SI issues, and didn't really put it together. Of course, teachers were just like, yeah, this is the form, and do it even more, and firm here. And then I opened a studio. So I opened a studio in 2005. I'd been teaching 5 or 6 years. And then I met a teacher who really opened the doors for me in a different way. I swung, as we do. I was way over here, and I swung all the way over to the other side and became the super belly breather. And so I've sort of experienced a big range of things that can happen in the body posturally, and trends that happen in yoga and how they affected me physically. But it was great. That other teacher, her name is Mary Pafford. She's amazing. And she opened my eyes to not everything needs to be clenched, because in the prior practice, it was Uddiyana Bandha. It was Muladhara Bandha.
Tightening up of the sphincters and the abdominals for people who are not familiar with that terminology.
The locks, right?
Locking up your channels.
Yeah, which I get, the containing of energy and moving of energy, and physically, it's a squeezing, a tightening, a holding.
Yeah. And
so Mary introduced me to, why are you clenching your butt all the time? I don't know. That's just what I was doing. And so it was a beautiful new world. I had the studio for 12 years. I sold it. I got the name back. I reinvented it as an online community now. And so that's kind of my yoga journey. But then there's an aside for the pelvic floor piece, where I'd always been what I would consider, and again, I think this is relevant because I was one of the teachers who thought I knew enough
about the pelvic floor.
I'm fascinated by the body. I love the body. I've done so many trainings and studies like you. I love Leslie Kaminoff, and I studied with him and Amy for 6 months in New York.
My gosh. Maybe we were in class together.
I was going to ask you, when were you studying with him?
2006, 2007, 2008. I went back year after year for those years. Oh my gosh, that's 20 years ago.
That was earlier. I was I was in the 2010s, 12, 13. And then onward, because they're just amazing until the breathing project closed.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 4 years ago, 2021, I had endometrial cancer. I found out I had endometrial cancer, and I had a hysterectomy. And
You're lucky that was caught.
I know that's a whole other story because I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
This
Were you
is
dismissed? Were you medically dismissed?
The amazing thing is I have a doctor who, a female GYN, who I called and said, I don't even know if I can ask you this, but like, can you take my uterus out?
Yeah.
And she didn't scoff. She didn't laugh. She didn't say, you're crazy. She said, we have to jump through some hoops. But I mean, if that's what you want to do, yeah.
So that brought you into the pelvic floor world.
So that brought me into because
in a different way.
I started having a hip issue, which really was a hip issue.
Yeah.
And like really intense hip pain. And I saw a chiropractor, a massage therapist, a rolfer, a PT. And to everybody, I would say, my pain is like, it's up there. And I would get like under my groin and I can't touch it. I can't tell you where it is. It's unlike anything I've ever.
People struggle to
there.
describe deep pelvic floor pain and hip pain. It's hard to describe it.
It was. I ended up paying out of pocket for an MRI to figure out what was wrong. I was sitting in a surgeon's office, and he said, I want to get another set of eyes on this. And while we're waiting, why don't you go to sports medicine PT and just, see if they can help you manage the pain. And, like all the guides were in alignment that day. I ended up in this woman's office, fabulous physical therapist. And she said, she listened to my whole story. And then she said, tell me again when the hysterectomy was. And I'm like, I don't know, it's irrelevant, but it was, here in the timeline. And she goes, all right, I'm going to send you to my best friend, Jessica, who is a pelvic floor therapist. And I'm going to tell her I have another hysterectomy victim for her. And my jaw dropped.
Crazy.
Like, what?
Yeah.
And in 4 sessions, I had to have internal work. In 4 sessions, my pain that I'd had for a year and a half was gone.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that is something we see all the time in my pelvic floor world. People post-hysterectomy with a lot of pelvic floor pain, and they're surprised because they're like, wait, I had no idea that I could even get pelvic floor pain from a hysterectomy. But that's that's a hysterectomy conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm so happy for you that you figured that out. So then you went through pelvic floor physical therapy, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I just
had sparked your interest in the pelvic floor.
It did. It really opened my eyes to not only do I not know enough, but like, why didn't I put this together? That this is my body, and I am really in touch with what's happening. Yeah. And this is an area, like you are often talking about, that like I can't see it.
Yeah.
So I don't have the map.
Right.
And I really want to know more. And so I started doing my own kind of deep diving, and then eventually found you and just so deeply resonated and loved you. So here we are.
And did the teacher training. Mm-hmm. And now we want to talk about, after you've done the teacher training, where we really dive into the pelvic floor, what do you think yoga misses about the pelvic floor? I mean, you are a long-time yoga teacher. You have done oodles of training. You've been practicing. You've been in your own body. And so, and you continue to, I know, teach and take classes. Mm-hmm. You're around yoga people all the time. I'm assuming you have formed ideas about because yoga, we were just talking about this morning, that yoga is like this amazingly ever evolving, it's like this self-evolving system. People are always making it now mobility in yoga, and then strength in yoga, and resistance training in yoga. Like, people are getting yoga to be a little bit more buffered, current with whatever is trending. Where's your thought about yoga and the pelvic floor? And that I'm curious to know your opinion.
Yeah, it's somewhat humbling to talk about, being deeply in this vocation. And I have a love for teachers and what we are aspiring to do and hold space and support and educate people. And I think it's a little bit of a split. Like, if there are certainly people who are in tune with, like, it's trending. I think pelvic floor, like somatic, like nervous system, some of that is really trending, and that's good. That's a good thing. And if I walk into any studio here in Sacramento, the mean average of the teachers aren't going to have a robust knowledge of the workings of the pelvic floor and how it is impacted by and impacts everything else in the body. It's just not something that, first of all, we can't cover it in a 200-hour training.
Right.
And for lots of reasons, I think it's just not something that it has a lot of awareness. And I'm saying a blanket, and that's not true across the board. Of course, there are people who are really focused on that and educating and do know. But again, as a mean average, I just hazard a guess that we don't know enough. And I don't normally take classes. I've been taking a few classes around town, and that's been my experience. Like, okay, we're still using that cue. Okay.
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody. I met somebody at a party the other night, and they were like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, where do I start?" I was like, "It's always the easiest." I'm just like, "I'm a yoga teacher." I sometimes just to make it easier. And I was like, "Yeah, I specialize in, pelvic floor health." And they were like, "Oh my God, that's so cool. I just had a baby last year. My pelvic floor needs so much help, but I'm so grateful to my yoga teacher because every time I go to yoga, she reminds us, pull up your pelvic floor." I know. So part of me was like, obviously I wasn't going to block her. And I wasn't going to say, I wasn't going to burst her bubble. She was excited. She was having this happy moment and wanting me to share in her joy that her yoga teacher is so great that her yoga teacher reminds her to always engage her pelvic floor. I wasn't going to bust that bubble and be like, well, actually there's better ways around it, because the truth is that it is a whole conversation. Like you just said, it's going to be hard to teach that in a 200-hour training. I mean, I think we can. I think we can definitely do it. I think we can get like a quick little module going in there,
Oh, for sure.
To dispel the current, just engage your pelvic floor and everything will be okay. So it was hard for me. I just responded and I was like, "Oh, that's so great. I'm so happy for you."
Yeah.
I didn't know how else to respond, because it takes a little bit of time to be like, you don't really need to be engaging your pelvic floor for it to be better, but okay, fine.
Right.
Right. Okay, just have that. And someone just wrote to me the other day and was like, "I'm a longtime yoga teacher, and somebody just asked me why I shouldn't be engaging my pelvic floor in yoga, and I forgot what the answer was, and can you remind me what I should say?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Well, do you walk around just like tightening your bicep all the time?" But I started with that. But
I
think it is really hard. I don't know if this is your experience, but it's just really hard for yoga people and yoga teachers to wrap their head around the fact that all will be okay, even if you don't engage your pelvic floor constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my experience, both as a longtime teacher and also leading teacher trainings, I've led 200 and 300-hour teacher trainings for a long time. The longer practitioner, the more experienced practitioner, the more experienced teacher, oftentimes is the harder, more challenging student. Yeah. Because they're invested. Like, but this is what I've learned. This is what I know. This is a part of my identity now. And to change that viewpoint, that mindset is a really big deal.
Yeah, and yoga people will say things to me. I don't know if you get this, like, well, then how am I supposed to create those locks, right? So the idea being that when you create a pelvic floor contraction and then a core contraction, you create this kind of lock that's essential for passing the energy through your body, could be one way of saying it. And I think people are truly concerned about missing out on that element if they're not engaging tightly. So we're running into like this energetic idea with this kind of anatomical, physical idea, and then slamming it up against like the reality that like that doesn't make your pelvic floor stronger.
Yeah. Yes. I was thinking of that exact thing. That's such a great way to say it, that how, and I think it matters where someone's coming in yoga. You know, we've got the flow folks who love the flow and maybe hot flow, and they're there for a particular reason that is totally valid. And then we've got the longer term, more, I would say maybe more purist people, and they're really interested in kind of the history and the philosophy and the energetics of it.
Yeah.
And then we've got the way that it's evolving, and you've got weights and strength training and all the things that you mentioned before. And I think each of those groups, and of course those aren't exhaustive, but everyone's going to receive the information a little bit differently. And I was kind of tripping out, like, oh yeah, because I probably fall into the not purist. I've never been a purist, but like, I love the energetics and the Kundalini and I find that fascinating. So that does, then we can get a little, ooh, I'm out here in the energetics, and I am not really coming back into the gross matter of the body and the facts of anatomy and mechanics. And
Right. Would you say that since doing now my training, which is so much more focused on the pelvic floor as an integrated part of the whole body, that you have changed how you talk about it in any way, or that you've changed how you encourage your students to think about their pelvic floor in a way where you're not necessarily disrupting the flow of a class, but you can, in the way that cue of just engage is pulled in there? Do you have a cue or a way that you integrate it now differently that you feel like you can give it the attention that you desire if you desire? Maybe it's not there. Maybe, you're not teaching group classes focusing on the pelvic floor, but have you changed anything about how you speak about it now that you've done like a training that's more concrete?
Yeah, a bajillion percent. Like, I never taught Mula Bandha. I am of the belief that it's not something that you do, it's something that happens when the conditions are correct. So I've never been
the pelvic floor engagement.
Yeah. I've never been a squeeze and lift person anyway. And in many ways, my asana, the pose, the instruction, the movement cues, maybe haven't changed so much because I am already similar to you, very creative, exploratory. Like, I take a lot of liberties in yoga. However, I would say the cueing, the subtlety, the cueing, and simply pointing out for people, this is great for your core and pelvic floor, just to sort of plant that seed. And I have started saying, because of some things that have happened that have made me more aware of how students have it ingrained, like, I do need to lift here. Someone asked me, Michelle, so should I be contracting and lifting all that? What should I be doing with my pelvic floor? And I was like, oh my, wow, I'm so glad she asked. Like, you're thinking about this is something that you would be doing. So I'll say, you don't need to do anything else. Just enjoy this internal rotation of your leg, enjoy this hip work, and simply pointing out that this is what will support your pelvic health. And, sometimes you need to name it, sometimes you don't need to name it. It's good to do both. But planting that seed, I think, has been really powerful for people.
Right. Like, if you put your body in this specific position, your pelvic floor is receiving benefit. You don't need to, same way with the arm. If I'm doing something in my arm, just by doing this, I'm benefiting the joint, but I haven't actually, in doing this, I'm not thinking contract, tighten, pull, lift. I'm thinking rotate, move, mobilize. I'm thinking, oh, go here, go here, go here. But I know that I'm receiving benefits. It's so interesting that people think they need to exert power and lift on the pelvic floor, as if the pelvic floor doesn't have this built-in mechanism that already does that. And I wonder if maybe in yoga it became the norm to lift and tighten because of the energetic, right? Like the energetic focus of these bandhas. But if you ask a lot of yoga teachers, why are you teaching that? And how can that benefit the core and pelvic floor? The majority of people that I've talked to and asked them, I'm like, oh, sometimes I'll meet a yoga teacher and I won't say that I'm a yoga teacher and I'll just play really dumb. And I'll just ask, why do yoga teachers always talk about the lock of the pelvic floor? And literally people are like, well, it's just lineage.
Exactly.
And I'm like, wait, but can you explain? Can you explain that cue? And they can't. And they can't explain why they're doing something. If I'm teaching somebody this move in my arm, and a student says to me, why are you doing this? I can give 45 reasons why we're doing this right now.
Right.
So it's so interesting to me that in so many yoga classes, you will hear this cue to lift the bandhas, the locks, to engage the pelvic floor. But the actual reason is because my lineage said so.
Yeah.
The yoga teacher, the other teacher that trained me told me that that's right.
That's right. And I think that's part of why it's so challenging for some teachers to embrace a different way, because it's lineage. This is how it's always been done. This was what my teacher said. And we parrot in the beginning, especially. That's how we learn. Until we find our own and make our own experiences and our own conclusions. But I think some people get really married to the lineage and then never evolve.
So anecdotally, I have noticed that a lot of my yoga teacher friends struggle with vaginal birth. I'm just going to put that out there. So I've been teaching yoga for 25 years also. I have had 3 children. I have watched many of my children have children. Many of my friends, not my children, although I would like that to happen soon. I've watched my friends, I'm ready to be a grandma. I've watched my friends have children. I've watched yoga teacher friends. And a lot of us talk about the anecdotal coincidence that we notice that a lot of yoga people struggle to have vaginal childbirth. Have you noticed that?
I've definitely witnessed that, yes. Early in my, even practicing, I don't know that I was teaching yet, but at the Tech and Thrust studio, when I was in that phase, very physical, very much about the locks, the lifts, the squeezes, and that teacher had a baby and it was something outrageous, like a 48 hour. I mean, it was really, really a long labor. And even at that time I thought, wow, that like I I would guess that has to do with all the locks that we can't release when it's so habitual. I found it in myself, like, wow, I feel like I'm starting to walk around like that a lot.
Locked up,
squeezed. Yeah. And I've seen that. That was sort of my first major eye-opening, like, whoa, I wonder if the Mula Bandha had anything to do with that. And then I've seen it beyond. And I've seen, conversely, women not in that type of practice, in a much more fluid practice that maybe just doesn't focus on the bandha so much, have much easier births. Yes, totally anecdotal, maybe coincidental, but it's a pattern that I would put together.
Yeah, for sure. And I hate blaming a system on that, but it's just so in my face, obvious, those connections.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, I had a client the other day, actually, an in-person client, which I don't do a lot of these days. It's a lot of online. And she came and she had this pattern of like extreme rib flare. So like, and she had been doing a certain type of yoga for many years that emphasized, again, the keeping your core super engaged and lifting up through the pelvic floor. And if you do it in your own body, if you pull your pelvic floor up and lift and then try to pull your core up, your ribs mechanically, like this is where they go. They will open wide and pull forward. And she was in this very wide rib pattern, abdominals concavely pulling up underneath her. Like she was kind of stuck in a hypopressive, in a Uddiyana Bandha.
Right.
And her pelvic floor was extraordinarily tight, which is why she came to see me. A lot of pelvic floor issues. And I didn't really know about her history with this yoga. But as we started talking, I was like, what has been your physical practice? And then she mentioned that. And it was like the canvas was right there, you know. Yeah. And she said to me, I have done that kind of yoga for so many years. And I know in my daily life, I have assumed that posture. Like I know in my daily life, I am still pulling my abdominals in. My ribs are kind of lifted, open, thrusted, and big. And I can feel my pelvic floor, like, but I always was told in yoga, like I was celebrated in yoga for this. Like
yes.
My yoga teachers celebrated this postural pattern. It's really hard for me to like reconcile that it's actually not contributing to the wellness and function of my pelvic floor. And it's so hard to have to explain that to a yoga person.
Yeah.
I find, I don't know about you, but I find that having to now explain why that pattern is not advantageous when they've spent decades in a studio being celebrated for it.
I know. And it's with the best of intentions. I want to be a good student. I want to do it right. I want to be a good girl. And
that's a good point.
And then to find out like, wow, I think that's, sometimes people can feel really sad about that, you know, and there's the grief of, you know, gosh, what have I been doing to myself? And I think all kinds of things can come up, a sense of betrayal, a sense of distrust, questioning. And then on the other side, I think another possibility, a possible response is pushback. Like,
oh, for sure.
Denial and defensiveness and digging in a little bit harder. And, you know, we all have our responses, but I think it is to be grieved that that's something that we've invested a lot of time in, and it's going to be that worldview perspective shift that asks a lot of. It's very human. I just want to normalize. It's so very human to feel that way.
Yeah. The disappointment.
Yeah.
And grief and pushback. I agree. I had that myself with my own, like, yes. Yes, I had that very strongly in my own body when I, woke up one day and realized maybe yoga wasn't as amazing for my body as I had always thought.
Yep.
It's really challenging to go there.
It is. I think
but then you find your way back. I found out like I had to leave it and then come back and dip in and dip out. And, like you said before, you just kind of find this way of being with it that finally works with you and for you. But it can take a lot of bouncing through different lineages.
Yes. Yeah.
Or until you just ditch all the lineages. And
ditch all the dogma. And exactly.
Ditch the dogma.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, I just wanted to, ask you if you have anything, as a longtime yogi, anything else you wanted to add to this conversation about yoga, the pelvic floor, things you've learned, things that I know you said that before you did the training, it was like this eye-opening experience, right? But I know you also have your own unique nuggets that you've come away with from your life experience with it. So I'm curious if there's anything else you wanted to share.
I think I'd love to speak just to the yoga teachers because I relate so much and really feel that journey, that when we are being asked to shift into a new perspective, change can be really challenging. Most people don't like change. And that's totally human, totally normal. I even in my colleague circle of fellow teachers, I've gotten some soft pushback. Isn't belly breathing da 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 da? Well, but isn't this still a good cue? Why is this bad? Why is this wrong? And it's been really interesting. And I'm so happy to be in that dialogue. Like, yes, okay, let's talk about it. But I found that the students, non-teachers, are much more curious and receptive. And the teachers are the ones who have been like, oh, I don't know.
So that's so interesting. Were you resistant when you started kind of hearing me talk about belly breathing maybe isn't the most advantageous? Was that something you felt resistant about? No, it wasn't. But I love like I want everything I want to learn. I want to keep learning and growing, and I want all the new information that the longer you teach, the more you don't know. And so that's always, I'm just constantly seeking out ways to learn. And it wasn't my first introduction to that idea. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I think it takes a few times before people warm up to things. So there's that piece that I think is interesting. And then also to the yoga teachers, just because something has history and longevity, that doesn't equate to validity. Like, keep questioning, keep asking, keep experimenting in your own body. I love that. Yeah. And we've spoken to it. I think we just get into but this is how it's done. And this is how I learned it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things that you often talk about that I really appreciated was that we don't have the map. This is an invisible space. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's taboo, right? We just don't go there as much. Mm-hmm. In our minds is like, oh, this is a place I should learn about. This, we'll take the workshop on the shoulders. Yeah. This is not so much in our mind. And I think we also have to call out patriarchy. Like, women's health hasn't been prioritized. So. Yeah. And this whole tighter is better is appealing to a penis. I mean, I hate to say it, but yeah. A lot of times tighter and better is relevant to the fact that if a penis was inside of you at that moment, that's what they would like, where the reality is actually what a penis would probably like more is the actual massaging that comes from the pelvic floor doing its thing of squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, always tight, and is a lack of blood flow. That's not going to be fun for anybody.
Right. Supple and responsive is what we want in the whole body.
Yes, and I often do think about how, unfortunately, there are a lot of cues in yoga that are very male.
Oh, completely.
Gaze oriented.
Yeah, completely.
Busting those myths is going up against generations of male lineage, ultimately.
Yes.
And that's really hard.
Yes.
Come up against.
Well, I was heartened. This was years ago when Gita Iyengar took over the training in India. She took over the main kind of training program. And I heard secondhand through people who were training at the Iyengar Institute there that she was prompting the changing of some cues that had been, longstanding through her father. And I thought, okay, like if the Iyengars are going to be open to changing some cues in Trikonasana, like this might be okay. Like there is some evolution that we can be open to happening.
Totally. I love that. I love that we need the signal from the elder. Speaks a lot to yoga too,
Totally. Yes.
I think as a longtime yoga person, I remember always being, especially back in the day, like, would my teacher approve?
Yes.
Now I don't go there anymore, but I just remember the fear of would I get in trouble? Yeah. There's just a lot of dogma in yoga, and I love, it's a great system, but there can be so much dogma.
Yes.
We have to wrap up our call. I just love talking to you. And I appreciate everybody paying attention. I want to say that for the teacher training, for those of you interested, our waitlist is now open for my teacher training that begins in September that Michelle just completed. So waitlist is there. And if you want a dogma-free approach,
yes,
with learning that's not based necessarily on lineage, but function, come join us. Anyway, Michelle, thank you. It's really lovely talking to you.
Well, I have to give a shout out to the training because, again, as someone who's, taken and put together trainings, I was so impressed with how this was put together and what it was. Its specificity, clarity, the tools, the application, the community that is in the RYC Pro program made it so rich. If I had a penny for every time I said every yoga teacher needs to take this program.
Oh.
Because I know there can be pieces, like a little module in a 200-hour, but when you're doing a 200-hour, you're so saturated, like there's very little getting in. So to have an opportunity to take a specific, intensive, focused, concentrated program and really absorb yourself in this content, I highly recommend your program.
Thank you.
Every teacher should take it.
I appreciate you saying that. I really do. It was so lovely having your presence there. I think that people think that the pelvic floor is a specialty and they don't realize that it's as important as understanding shoulder mechanics and core mechanics. And if not in a way more important, it is the place where so much of literal force, like movement force, goes right through the conduit of the pelvic floor. Like it is receiving the literal force of walking and moving, and like the minute your foot touches the ground, that force goes right up through your pelvic floor. Like it's so important. to be able to receive and transmit and absorb and offload force. And I think that people don't see it like that because it is such a taboo subject.
Yes.
And I do think yoga teachers and movement professionals knowing more about the pelvic floor is not about a specialty. It's a baseline, it's a foundation, it's a must. You can't really understand the mechanics of breathing and the core if you don't yet everyone's talking about breath.
Yeah.
You can't understand breath work if you don't understand pelvic floor. And pelvic floor is not just tighten, lift, squeeze, banda it up, right? That is not actually what the pelvic floor does. How sad that that's what we've whittled it down to.
Exactly. And one of the things you said to me when we had our call that has stuck with me was I didn't know, are my people going to resonate with this? How am I going to end up working with this? And you said, as soon as you start saying pelvic floor, they are going to be like, what? Me? And that is exactly what happened. That is exactly. My students who I see weekly for years never said anything about their leakage, their pain. I start talking pelvic floor. I started teaching some in-person workshops, sold out. They're showing up. They're telling me about their leakage that's so bad that they're worried to leave the house.
Yeah.
And every person who told me that is now resolved.
Amazing.
Right?
That is incredible. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. I say that to people all the time. Your students are not going to come to you telling you they have a pelvic floor problem. But if you are saying, I understand the pelvic floor, I feel really confident in helping you resolve what's happening in your pelvic floor, or, because we're not necessarily always about fixing things, but like helping you understand it and find a healing path to it. Suddenly the gates fling open and all these people, feel welcome, but until that, they don't have the contacts. They don't think they're in the right room for that. They're not going to talk about it.
Yes, exactly. And I would just say to people, don't wait until, like some things we're not interested in until it's personal to us.
Right.
Like you get the shoulder injury and now like, okay, I'm going to learn everything about the shoulder. Oh, I've got a pelvic floor issue. Oh, maybe I should pay attention to this. Don't wait until it's personal to you, because it's always relevant, and it's so relevant for your community, your teacher, your students.
Yeah. It's an amazing niche to feel confident in. I will just tell a quick story. I was in New York a few months ago and I took a class at my friend's studio, and the woman next to me says to the teacher, "Oh, no, I have a prolapse. I'm not going to do that." And the teacher was like, you could see the teacher's eyes just glaze over, like it was like everything crossed, like all the wires crossing, because they had no preparation for that. They didn't know how to answer it. So the teacher was like, okay, just do your own thing. Okay, just do your own thing, which a lot of people, unfortunately, who have a pelvic floor issue, who do speak up and they're like, oh, I have a pelvic floor issue or a diastasis recti, in a class that, again, the wires suddenly synapse, like everything crashes, and the teacher's like, oh, just modify, and I was that teacher who was like, I don't know what to do when they tell me that, and so knowledge is power, and understanding about the pelvic floor, again, is not about understanding about a niche. It's literally being able to reach every person in the room, because every person has a pelvic floor, and it is that critical to their well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
and what the beauty of your program is, not only understanding the pelvic floor, but like, let's say, okay, we stop the clenching and we stop maybe the tucking or something that's a little bit more specific area focus, but we don't address the breath and we don't address the rib flare and, the feet, but you cover all of it, which is what's so brilliant. It makes it really comprehensive, and it makes teaching so rich and interesting. Like if someone's feeling a little stale, this just gives so much fodder and inspiration for focus and things to share and ways to be supportive and effective in teaching. I obviously I am a huge fan, and I just can't recommend it enough.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'm glad you loved it. I love teaching it, and I especially love when yoga teachers join, because I love busting open these long-held truths about breathing, about the core, about everything being tight all the time, about everything being locked, about, all of that people really don't understand. Again, they're just repeating cueing that they heard teachers saying. That's not necessarily advantageous, but
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
This has been really nice. Michelle, thank you.
Yeah,
Your
thank
students
you.
are so lucky to have you. I love your calm, powerful, intuitive energy. Everything about you is just so inviting.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I love being in the same space with you. So thank you for joining today. Thank you for everybody who was watching, and
Yes.
we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Lauren. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle. Bye.